Do you ever look back and remember when you could do something that you can't do now? These days, a lot of people are remembering when we could all do things that just aren't possible anymore, aren't they? Well, today is a dreary, rainy day, so even more things that I'd like to be doing are just not going to happen. Oh well. But in the middle of changes, the changes we're all experiencing, not only do certain things seem impossible, but we can sometimes feel all alone at the same time. Hello, I'm Ian Currey, and this is Thinking Out Loud. Let me tell you what I think. Do you know what carpet burn is? It's one of those things that almost every new dad experiences when he starts giving horsey rides to his young children. Your knees get really raw after a while as they rub along the carpet. Well, long ago I used to be able to lift both my sons in one go, and if I ever dare lay on the floor, I would instantly become horsey. And then I'd have to give rides. Sometimes both of the boys at the same time would clamber on. No wonder I feel a few aches and pains in my back all these years later. Back then though, the boys really were no load at all, and in fact I would enjoy them giggling away when Horsey decided to roll over or would suddenly decide to trot or just fall down. Usually I just wanted a little rest and so would lay down before suddenly springing up and trotting around again to the giggles of the boys. These days, of course, I would have significant trouble lifting either one of them, let alone both at the same time. Over on the model railway there is a character called Jack. He's supposed to be very strong, and so I put him right where you would expect to find a Jack, holding up a car. Now, of course, this is just me being silly and having some fun, but none of us would expect anyone to be able to lift a car like that, would we? Well, not on our own at least. Since it's raining and not nice at all, I'm fooling around in the garage with Robert, and he's agreed to let me show you how I can still lift him up. I'm not going to attempt to pick him up, but instead I'm going to use a lever. Well, here they say lever, but whichever way it's the same. Now, levers are everywhere. They are how we open a can of beans and how we weigh things and how we move things in a wheelbarrow. It's even how a screwdriver works. But let me show you how this one works. This plank is balanced on a block of wood there. The engineers who like this sort of thing call that a fulcrum. It's just a fancy name for where a lever pivots. Now, if the plank is balanced nicely, we can add weight to both ends evenly and it will stay balanced. But if we move the fulcrum off center like this, then there is more plank on one side than the other. Let's put a lot more plank on one side of the fulcrum, then we can see what happens. Now I'll put a Robert on the short end like this and see how easy it is to lift him up. To lift Robert up, I will need only to push down with much less of his weight on this end, and so it will be much easier to lift him up off the ground. If we make the lever even longer, then we will need even less effort to lift a Robert, although he's not going up nearly as far as he was at the start when things were more balanced. I think I might just need a nice pot of paint or something to lift Robert, even though the paint, of course, weighs a lot less than Robert, and especially straight after lunch. So by using a lever, I've managed to reduce the amount of burden it would be to lift Robert. Another way to do this would be to get a few friends together and each one of us get a bit of Robert and lift, and that would be a lot of fun too, wouldn't it? But I'm not so sure Robert would be quite so appreciative of that. Well, long ago, when I was a policeman back in England, we once needed to move a car quickly out of the way of a fire engine. And instead of waiting for a tow truck, one leader type gathered a whole group of men, and we just picked up the car and moved it out of the way. Now, it really wasn't that we were all strong, like Jack. It was that we had all taken a small part of the weight and shared the load. These days, the load we're carrying, often by ourselves, can be overwhelming, can't it? Now, I'm not talking about when you go off to the grocery store and come back with all those bags in your arms, although that gives you something of the idea. No, I'm talking about the things that others may not see, the unusual struggles that we've never had to face before, and we just don't know how to cope with on our own, and we don't do it at all well. I think by now you know that one of my favorite books of the Bible is Philippians. Let's take a look at the end of chapter 1. And there we find Paul addressing something like this when he says, "We are in this struggle together. You have seen me struggle in the past, and you know that I am still in the midst of it." And I can almost hear him sighing as he goes on at the start of chapter 2 there. Is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? It's as if he then says, "Great, now prove it." Look at the next verse there. After just sighing his way through the previous verse, he says, "Then make me truly happy by agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and purpose. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too." Now, there's a bit of a theme running through some of these letters that Paul writes, and it's about a team thing and doing things together. Did you notice that very first verse I read there had this phrase, "We are in this struggle together"? Well, that's sort of helpful, I suppose, at least saying that. We know we aren't on our own. But look what Paul says in Galatians chapter 6. Share each other's burdens, and in this way obey the law of Christ. And when Paul says the law of Christ, he's referring to the love God, love people idea. But I love the very next part. If you think you're too important to help someone, you are only fooling yourself. You are not that important. Sharing the load is so important these days, isn't it? Yes, we are in this struggle together, but we can only really say that if we are indeed doing some of the lifting. In days of struggle, who are you helping? Whose burdens are you helping to carry? Before I go, I know there's some of us sometimes feel a bit alone, and those times we can feel like we are far away from God, and it's really lonely. It's not that we want to wander off or anything. It's just that we really are far away and alone sometimes, especially when we're physically on our own so much. Well, tucked away in the book of Jeremiah, I notice this in chapter 23. "Am I a God who is only close at hand, says the Lord? No, I am far away at the same time." I love that idea. When we think we're far away from God, he says, "Nope, no, I'm far away with you too." This week, I'm setting you some homework. This week, I want you to think of someone who might be struggling in just the same way that you are. I want you to reach out to them and send them an encouraging note. Find a way of practically helping, and helping someone who you know will appreciate you coming alongside in some way. Every time you wonder what someone might be doing or how they're coping, remember Paul's words, "We are in this struggle together." Yes, we are. Until next time, goodbye.